Hi, this is Dominic from the Vela Collective. It's my lockdown project to move all the components from this broken Peugeot HLE Pro Team frame to the Look frame, which I have. The Peugeot bike is broken right here. You can see, I don't know if you can see that. Can you see any close? You see the chainstay there is broken at the hanger, so that means the bike's finished. So I'm going to move all the components over to this frame. This is a steel frame, but it has a completely different sound to this Look frame, and I checked, like, this is obviously steel, but this is as well, but they sound completely different. But I'm not sure this is a Look frame because I don't think Look made steel frames, and I think although it's got Look stickers all over it, I think someone put these on afterwards, and it was another brand originally. I'm not sure what it is. Anyway, I'm going to move all these components over to it. The biggest problem I have is the seat post, which fits this Peugeot, which is about mid-80s. I imagine it's probably 26.2 or something like this, or maybe even smaller, but it's way too small for this, so this requires a different seat post. The steerer is fine because this is standard 22 millimeters, and that will be the same. Bottom bracket, the width of the bottom bracket could be a problem with the alignment of the rear derailleur and the crank. We'll have to see, but the parts on this they're okay. This is a Suntour Superb Pro crankset, which is pretty good. Well, it is very good. Shimano 105 derailleur, Huret, or as his French say, Huret shifters, and front derailleur, and these are like Deacom brakes, which are okay. So I'll try and move all this over to the Look frame, and here is the wheel set, which should fit. I imagine it's probably 100 and, well, it's 6-speed, so I imagine it should fit okay, because I think this is probably late 80s and this is mid 80s. Yeah, maybe this is even early 90s, but maybe a few years difference between them. And so that's what I'll try and do and see how it goes. The first thing I'm going to do is going to take off the pedal, because it's easier to take the pedal off when the crank's on the bike. I think you've got more leverage when you have the pedal and the crank on the bike at the same time. So I use a 15mm spanner, and pedals can be really difficult to get off sometimes, but best thing to do is to use a mallet, and this one I've already tapped off, but sometimes they can be very, very tight. So take the pedal off, and do the same on the other side. These are pretty nice pedals actually. They're specialised. I don't think they came with the original bike. Standard threading. I haven't seen these before actually. So, and then I'll take this pedal off the other side, but also to release this dust cap, which can also be tricky. But this one is quite easy to get out, and there it is, the original dust cap of the Suntour Superb, Super B, whatever you want to call it. And there is this should be a 15mm bolt, which needs to come out next. So to take the crank off, I'm going to need a 15mm socket with a socket wrench. the crank puller, which are standard threading, get them any bag shops, £7 here, and the big wrench to turn that. There's a thing here, this is a standard 15mm socket, right? Watch, it doesn't fit the bolt, so you need this thinner version of that, which is a bit of a pain, and that fits. So there it goes, that's fitted. So a standard socket won't fit that 15mm crank bolt, so you need to get this thin edged one, which is a bit of a pain, which I had a few years ago. So then we're going to take off the crank bolt and take the crank off with this socket and the crank puller. So now I'm going to take the socket wrench and take this crank bolt out by going anti-clockwise. Get a good hold on it. There it goes. Not so difficult. Some can be really difficult to get off. It just depends how lucky or unlucky you are. So you do the same on both sides. There's the bolt. You always have a washer, so make sure you get the washer out before you put the crank puller in. I've done that once where I left the washer in, and it's really problematic if you do that. So this is a standard threaded crank puller, because this crank isn't a vintage French crank, so you put it in, not absolutely crazy tight, but tight enough so that it'll be secure in there, and then you use the wrench. You're going to use this big wrench to turn it clockwise, so you pull out the crank. So make sure the wrench is on the flats properly so it won't slip, and then you just push. It's going to take probably half a dozen turns. You put it back on the flats every time, and it will get pretty hard as you get into the third, fourth turn. Sometimes you end up having to do it with your foot, and sometimes it's easier on a bike stand, where I don't find. Yeah, this is pretty hard. You check it, sometimes they come off. You just gotta keep going. This one isn't easy. And you gotta make sure that your hand doesn't go anywhere near these teeth. So this is, I don't know, the fourth, fifth turn. Make sure it's on there. Wow, that's really on. And this may need extra work than by hand. Let's see if I can give it one more go. Keep going. It does my back in as well. That wasn't a good angle. Yeah, I don't think I can do any more than that. Now the wrenches. So it's still not off. I'm going to use my foot. So I'll try using another approach to try and get the final 2 or 3 turns. So to get the crank off, I have to resort to using my foot, but that wouldn't work if the chain wasn't on, because when the chain's not on, the crank just spins round by itself. But when the chain is on, it secures it, which means that you can actually push down on one of the arms and the thing won't spin by itself. So it'll be locked in by the chain, so then you can use the strength of your leg rather than your arm. So I'll show you what I mean. Problem is the chain is so rusted it doesn't sit in the teeth that well. So there's a lot of movement going on there. Try it again. I keep hold of the front brake, push down on the frame. I must be getting really close now, because this is really nearly, there's only 2 or 3 threads left here, but it's still not coming out though. Do it again, hold the front brake, push down on the frame. Checking. Crazy, alright. I put this crank on myself about 2 years ago. I don't know why it's so difficult to get off. Okay. Show you where I am now. So you can see there's hardly any threads left for me to actually work with. Maybe 2 threads. So this is it really. Last couple of goes. So check it out. It came off. I didn't actually need to go any more than those 2 threads, so it just came off on by itself. Must have been the last turn did it. So that was a lot of work. So I took the other crank arm off on the left side, which I thought was going to be easier. Normally the left side is a bit easier, but this time it wasn't. And the tool, the crank puller, went deep into the arm here, and the biggest problem I had after that was actually taking the tool out of here, and it went so deep in. You can see here, there, all the threads have gone, so it was really stuck in there, and I had to use these flats to get it out, and it was a really hard job, like half an hour. So I think the problem I've been having with this crank puller is it's old, and once they get old they don't pull as well, they just don't have the same effect, and you have to go deeper and deeper, and in the end this is what happens. You end up having a real problem with nearly every crank. So my thinking is I have to get a new crank puller and probably renew them every year, because this one is about 5 years old, maybe 6, and I don't think it's of any use now. This is a park tool, CWP 7. It's a really good one, but definitely needs renewing. So this is an old Suntour derailleur for a 10-speed, old vintage 10-speed bike. I'm not sure this clamp is going to fit on the look frame that I'm going to try and put it on. I got a feeling that this clamp is going to be smaller, so I'll see if it fits. So take out the cable first. Uses an 8mm spanner. There it goes. And now I can take out the derailleur itself. So here's a new problem. The front derailleur is a screw-in type, not an Allen key type, and this is really rusted on. So I'm going to have to put WD-40 on it and let it soak. Whether or not that helps, should help a bit, but it's another problem this bike is showing, so I'll see how it goes tomorrow, give it a night to soak in, see if it helps. Yes, there it goes. Well, that helped. So here it goes. I haven't done this, so I just don't know. I think looking at it so far, it looks alright. Yeah, it looks fine actually, which is a good thing because clamps come in different sizes. Yeah, that fits. So I measured the Look bottom bracket spindle, and it's about 118mm with 20mm on this drive side. So if I go here like this on the Peugeot, you can see it's about 20, 21, it's practically the same. And I think it's slightly short. I can't show you with this. I used to have an electronic caliper which made it a lot easier, but it's disappeared. And I think this is a bit short, about 116, but I think it should work. It's pretty close, so I think the crank should have no problem with alignment. Rear derailleur comes off with a 5mm Allen key. Take out the cable. The Shimano 105. So I'm going to take this front shifter off. I cut the cable because it was frayed, so I can't keep it. But there's a problem here, a new problem, that the shifter cable, the head of it is stuck in the shifter, and this does happen. It can be a real pain to get out. So I'm going to take the shifter off, and you have to make sure that you don't forget where the pieces go, where the parts go. So keep it together and make sure you know how it's put together. So I've had these before where I haven't been able to get one out. It's also a good idea to see the shape of the shifter, which side attaches to the frame, so that you know which way to put them back on. This is how they are assembled and ready to go back onto the other frame. So I've taken the crank off, the front derailleur, and the shifters, and the rear derailleur. And now I'm going to take the brakes off. Front one is still connected with the cable. Seems to work alright. It's got cobwebs on it. And it requires a 10mm spanner to take that off. It looks pretty rusted. And the rear one looks even worse, but should clean up okay. This is an 8mm, not the 10 like for the bolt at the back. Once it's loose, just pull out the cable. And there it is. Goes in between the mudguard hook. These have come out, the spring has come out here, as you can see. It's supposed to be inside. So now I'm going to take off the stem with the handlebars, and this is a little plastic cover where the stem bolt will be. There it is. I think it's 6mm, I imagine, and then that will be turned anti-clockwise, and hopefully the stem will just come out of the head tube. There it goes. It's quite easy to turn usually, and the thing is only to turn it a few times so that you don't come out of the actual locking nut, which is inside here. You want to keep that attached, so just turn it a few times so it loosens it, and then you just hopefully pull it out. Well, that was pretty easy compared to some. So there's the frame. The frame set stripped of its parts now, just with its headset and bottom bracket, which I don't think I need for the rebuild. Pretty nice frame, but totally broken because of the broken chainstay. So I'm going to check out these two wheels now, the rear one and the front one. Check out if they're running true and what the bearings are like. So take hold of the rear wheel by the lock nuts there on both sides and spin it. And this one feels good, it's very smooth and it's running true. There's no play. Let's see here. There's no play in the bearings here at all. That's actually really good, very smooth. And this one, I have my doubts about this one because I noticed here, I don't know whether you can see, there's grease here on the outside of the hub, which is a sign that it's leaked out from inside, and that to me is always a sign that probably the bearings will be dried up, losing this grease, and probably will need re-greasing, maybe. You check for any play here, and there's a tiny bit of play, definitely some. You can hear the clicking, and let's see how well it spins. Because there's too much play, it'll probably spin on and on because it's too loose. So it spins really well, but it definitely needs tightening up here. So I'll have to undo the lock nut and tighten this here and tighten that. But they're okay, not bad for a 20-year-old set of wheels. So here's the look frame with the wheels attached, just to help stop putting stuff on it. I did have a bike stand, but I sold it recently before the lockdown. So putting the wheels back on just makes it easier, and I think I'll start off with the crank and then rear derailleur and the shifters. So start off with the transmission and move on from there. So the bottom bracket spindle feels pretty smooth, there's no play in it. So it's ready for the crankset to go back on, which I cleaned. So it's really clean now. It looks much better than it did. So this is a standard spindle, square tapered spindle. So I'm going to put this crank bolt back in to secure it. It's 15mm with a socket wrench. There we go. And now I have to tighten it. You need to do it as much as you can. This is important that it doesn't get loose. So there it is. I need to put the dust cap on it. This is original dust cap for this. Unfortunately the other side doesn't have the original. It has a strong light dust cap, but it's okay. Just tighten that. I can tighten that with the 5mm Allen key. You can see that it sits about 2 or 3mm away from the chainstay, which is about right. So it actually looks pretty good. That's what you want. Rear derailleur needed a lot of cleaning, loads of dirt in there actually, and I cleaned the jockey wheels and lubricated them so they spin much better. This needs just a 5mm Allen key to put it into the hanger. For the shifters, as this bike was set up for not for down tube shifters but more modern brifters, it has this as a cable guide, and these have to come off, and underneath should be the braze-on parts that should allow the traditional down tube shifters to go inside, just like the Peugeot had. So take this off and then hopefully take these off. And there is the braze-on for the down tube shifters. Okay, we're going to put the front shifter on the way that it came off. Exactly the same arrangement. So you screw it in and make sure this lines up here, goes into that hole like it did, and yeah, not easy. See, this isn't turning anything. So I have to use something to turn this if that's better. Yeah. So I had a bit of a problem with this braze-on part of the front shifter on this side. I found that it wouldn't go on. It was too small, it was slightly too small, and this wouldn't fit it. So I had to file it with a small file, like so. Just not a lot, just to get it to be able to fit it like that. And now it's fine. Not a huge problem. I don't think this is a precise science, this whole thing, but it should work okay. In now. So you can see here on the shifters I had to put two little spacers there, two small washers, because the assembly was too loose. So not ideal, but I think it works okay. And the brakes are on, and you can see here I had to tighten these as well, not too much because otherwise then the mechanism won't actually work, but just enough because the body was so loose it's all over the place. Not great brake setup there with that, you know, screw sticking out, but I think the brakes are okay. So next will be the, and now position the front derailleur correctly. You want it to be just above, maybe just 2-3 millimeters above the crank and following its path so that it runs really parallel to the chain rings. You can see that. Yeah. Just test that it doesn't actually touch the crankset when it comes out, and that looks alright. So this is the steer tube, and I'm not going to tighten it straight away because I do that by increments once the bike is really set up. You can see here there's a hole here and there, and like the Peugeot, it's got internal routing for the brake cable, the rear brake cable, which will go through the tube and to the rear brake caliper. All I have to do is tighten this. Not that much right now, as I said. I can tighten it properly at the end. Some lubrication for the cables. So this is the trickier part of threading the brake cable through this bridge here, where there's a small hole at the top and a larger hole at the bottom. Without the, there it goes. You see it's locked in there now. You close the lever. So thread the cable through the housing, which should feel smooth. Like this, you should test it. This one feels okay. And then if you test the lever so it's pulling, so you know it's, that nipple on there is still locked in the bridge, and then feed it to caliper. And you find the hole it threads down to. There it goes. Pull it through. Came out again as I threaded it through the caliper. So I can feel the end of it here on my finger. So just have to, there it goes again, you see. You just have to make sure you keep things tight as you thread it. And if it comes out, you just have to find the lock again on it. Okay, so put this in the lock position. Make sure that this is tight, and with an 8mm, it should be 8mm. Yeah. I always depress the caliper like that, and then make adjustments, micro adjustments later. So if you can see here, that's pretty good. And then check it. I think when you press the brake after fitting the cable, it always comes out slightly. There's always a bit of slack. So that's why I hold it pretty tight, the blocks to the rim, because it'll always come out slightly, and that's come out pretty well, maybe a millimeter. So here's the Peugeot seat post. You can see it's 24mm, which is very thin, and definitely wouldn't fit the other frame. So I guess that it was a 26.6. You can just see that there. So I bought this 26.6 seat post, and I was going to see if this would fit, because that's my guess of this French frame. So when I try to put this 26.6mm seat post in, I knew within a minute that it was too big. I got as far as the black. You can see the black here. I got as far as that, and then it started to get really stuck. So I think if I had gone all the way down the seat post, I think that I'd never get it out again. So it's not a 26.6, I think it's a 26.4mm, and I've just ordered another one off eBay, and now I have to wait for that, which is really frustrating. It's very difficult to measure the size of the seat post needed. I did it with an electronic caliper and a ruler, and the difference between a 26.6 and a 26.4 is so slight that it's very difficult to know by measuring it. Even though the old chain is unusable, it's a good idea to keep it, because it gives you a guide of how long the new chain should be when it gets fitted. So this chain has 108 links. You count them, each 1, 2, 3, 4, 108, and seeing that the Peugeot chainstay is a centimetre bigger, maybe you're looking at maybe 106 for the slightly smaller Look frame, and seeing the Look frame has the same freewheel with the same speeds, the same rear derailleur, then you'd say, well, that's a pretty good guide. Maybe just 106, 107 links for the new chain. So I'm going to measure from the end of the chainstay to the middle of the bottom bracket. So if you look at it here, it's like 37.5 centimeters, which compares to 38.5 centimeters with the Peugeot. So it's 1 centimeter shorter than the Peugeots. So I've wrapped the chain around the largest chain ring, around the largest freewheel ring, and through the derailleur, to get an idea what it looked like when it's fully stretched, and how many links I've got to count here. So it just gives an idea of if it will make it okay. So there you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 links, and it will still be okay. So that's just to make sure that 107, 108 maybe links will be sufficient for the biggest rings of the chainring and the freewheel. That looks okay. So I've wrapped the chain through into the rear derailleur, making sure that it goes in between these guides here, otherwise it won't work. And it's 116 links, this chain, so I'm looking to take 8, maybe even 9 links off, and I have to make sure that that's sufficient to go through all the gears, so there's enough chain, enough slack to go into the biggest chain rings. So I'll just check that. So that's 108 links on this chain. You can see this is on the minimum, the smallest chain ring, and the smallest on the freewheel, and it's not too, like, there's not too much slack in it, and I think that should be okay. So in the end, 108, you know, that sounds pretty reasonable. I can't actually check it on a stand yet because I still haven't got a stand, but I'm just going by instinct here. Put the front derailleur cable into the front shifter. I think here, because this is a stop here, I think there should be housing here. I prefer it to have housing where it stops here, but I haven't got any housing. And as you can see, the cable itself doesn't sit that well inside that stop and that hole. But having said that, you know, the derailleur works fine. But I don't know whether this can cause some fraying down there in time. But as you can see, the shifter cable is in. Trying to focus that. Yeah, that's it. There it is, and it goes down and underneath into this cable guide under the bottom bracket. So I don't have housing, and I think it's okay for now, but it's not perfect. I would prefer to have housing there, but that's okay. So I'm doing the rear derailleur. You can see here, you make sure you don't go over this part. Put it under. There it goes. And down again through the guide here. It's not very smooth, to be honest. It feels dirty. I'm just going to clean that. This is the housing from the Peugeot, the same housing that was on that bike. It's not perfect for this. The shape isn't perfect, but I don't have any of the housing, so I'm just going to use it again. And make sure that's going to be tight. And then tighten it with a 5mm Allen key. You see that? It's heavy. Even though it's fluted, it's a lot heavier than the other one. So it's not great quality, but at least it should work. So here we go. Okay, that works. Finally. Here's the finished bike, completely built. Looks pretty good. You know, it's not perfect, but for all the parts, you know, they all transferred over except for the seat post. The crank, derailleurs, shifters, they required really screwing on tight. They're not perfect, but I put extra washers in there. Brakes are okay. The pads aren't very good on the back. Seat post is new. Everything else is original, really, to the Peugeot. So yeah, it seems like it's been pretty good. So I'm going to ride it. So my daughter's going to follow me. Look at me. No rattles, really. Headset's alright. Bottom bracket feels okay. So this is the first time I'm going to ride this thing. Got this new chain on it. Here we go. Pretty good. Yeah, quite pleased with that. Cheers.